everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending where you're watching us from. All right, so let's close that. I'm actually going to start with a couple of slides today. So we did do gradients, what was it, about 2 years ago? So this is that portion of it. I'm just going to do a little bit of comparison of the different types of gradients and gradient maps and what they are and what they do. If you've already purchased the notes, these are on the first page of the note, so you don't have to miss out on that. And if you haven't purchased them, well, you really should. They're on sale for just $7.50 until next Wednesday, next week. And you also get the images. I'm using a few textures today, and I also, the gradients that I'm going to use, I put into a separate gradient file, which you also get with the notes so that you can, take the images and follow along with the replay and the notes and practice and kind of see it come together yourself. So, first up, there is the gradient tool. And this is the tool that's on the left toolbar in Photoshop. You would manually add a new blank layer to use the gradient, and this allows us to add a gradient to an image. However, we cannot go back and change the colors of the gradient once it's applied. You would have to delete the layer and kind of start over again. And a gradient applies color to your image like a paintbrush over the whole top of the image equally. So you're going to see that happen as I start to get into projects. Preferably, rather than the gradient tool, you'd want to use the gradient adjustment layer. In this, you would access through the adjustment layers panel. If you click that black and white circle at the bottom of your layers panel and choose gradient, and that will add a new layer. It also automatically adds a mask, and this is where we're going to put the gradient. But this also gives you the ability to change the gradient and to move it around on the layer. As I mentioned, it applies a mask for you. It still applies the color as a wash with no distinction between bright and dark areas. But that's okay. There are times when we want that as opposed to a gradient map, and you'll see the differences, more apparently when I start doing it. And the scale feature in that layer controls the feathering, which is the blend between the two colors. So you can make it, blend more gradually or a sharper blend depending on what you're doing. And then the one I probably use the most is the gradient map adjustment layer. And this utilizes the foreground and background colors to create a gradient, although there are lots of presets that you can get, as well as create custom gradients. I have 10 different sets of gradients in my online store. There are others I've shared, some through the Wednesday blog when I do the Around the Web, some freebie ones. There's tons of things out there, and there are some in your panel, some default ones that come with Photoshop. So what a gradient map does is it's actually mapping the color values of an image, which range from 0 to 255 on the, when you look at like your histogram, to the tone or color value we want to set it to. So basically, it's going to take the darker colors of the gradient and apply it to the darker colors of your photo, and the lighter colors in the gradient will apply to the lighter colors. And some gradients have more than 2 colors, and you'll see that as well. And you can also use this feature to create a black and white image if you wanted to, though I prefer the black and white adjustment layer. But you can also add toning to an image to give it the look of sunset, sunrise, golden hour, which we're going to do in our first project, and things like that. So you'll get a feel for what all these things mean as we go along, but that's the basic differences. All right, so let's get rid of that. So we are going to start with this image. This is a cell phone image. It was taken on a foggy morning. This is not far from our house at Amy's Mill. A deer happened to be walking across the field. We were staying here. That's a location that we usually shoot an old truck. And so this is a cell phone image, so it's not quite as sharp as it could be, but it works well for this. So I wanted to warm this up even a little bit more. Even though it's kind of got that golden color, I wanted to emphasize that with this one. So this is where we're going to use a gradient fill because I want to apply this yellow toning to the whole image. Okay, so again, to the gradient adjustment layer is going to come down to the bottom of my layers panel, hit the black and white circle, or as one of my students years ago dubbed this the Italian cookie, which is like those black and white painted cookies, and you're going to select gradient. So it defaulted to just a black to transparent, so don't worry about that because we're going to change that. So the way you get to the gradients to change them is just click in this color bar. And these are all of the gradients I have installed in here. So you can see I have my own sets, different ones from that I've downloaded. Basics are what come with Photoshop. There's a bunch of different things in here. These are just your like real basics. And then for this one, I'm going to, I put them all in one folder of what we're going to use today. And this is the set you will get with the notes if you purchase them. So I'm going to use this yellow one, and this is from one of my Sunset Gradient 1 set. So I'm going to select that, and then I'm going to say OK. But before I close this box, I really want the darker yellow on top and the lighter yellow on the bottom. So to flip that, we can quickly do that with the reverse button. You could also change this to a minus 90, which would do the same thing, but you don't want to do both because then they'll counteract each other. So it's one or the other, either one is the same. And you can also, if you wanted an angle, it doesn't have to be at 90. It could be at, say, minus 60, and then you've got it, going upper left to lower right. So depending on your image, you might want to change that as well. But for now, we're going to stick with that, and then I'm going to say OK. And you can see now we have a separate layer with the gradient on it. It automatically applied that layer mask if we wanted to mask that gradient off a part of our image. So for this one, it's kind of like working with textures. We're going to change the blending mode to make it work with our image. So you come up to your blending modes, and for this one, I'm going to soft light. And then I'm going to lower the opacity to about 50%. So you can see there was our before, and we thought that had a nice yellow glow, but now that we've added this, now it's really, a nice warm kind of an image. So you can use gradients to tone your images as well as, all the other different things we're going to do today. All right, so that is our first project. So next we are going to use it to change the color of the sky. So this image, this was out at Bosque del Apache in New Mexico. Very gray sky, so there's really not much color at all. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to open up a gradient fill layer, click in my box, come down to my section here, and this one we're going to use this one that's like blue to yellow. This one is from a company called Media Loot. These I got as freebies way back when. I couldn't even tell you when. And you can see how this one's got a whole bunch of different stops of color, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this as we go, but basically with this one, they've taken the yellow and created different shades of the yellow and the blue, and then to create different shades just to get the blend the way they wanted it when this one was created. If I can talk, we'll be good. Okay, so we'll say OK here. And this one, we don't need to flip because I want the blue to the yellow, so we can say OK. This one I'm going to change to a darken blend mode. And then the opacity about 85%. Now we have a little bit of a problem, right? Now our bird is looking really weird because it's got this gradient over top. So this is where masking comes into play. So the easy way to do that is I'm going to just hide this for a moment. I'm going to select my background layer, go over to the left and grab my quick selection tool and click select subject. And Photoshop does it pretty good job of getting most of it. It's not perfect because it's a bright background behind it, and it's got white, so I'm just gonna tweak it a little bit here. I'm not going to worry about the edges of the feathers because the color would kind of show through that anyway because they're pretty transparent. But I do want to get the edge of the wing, and sometimes you get too much. And try and get there. And we don't have to be perfect for now. You get the idea. I think most of you have done selections before. So now that we have our selection, I do want to grab that part though. I'm going to turn this back on, click my layer mask, and then I'm going to click on the add a layer mask, and what it's going to do is replace that plain one with a new mask. So we're going to click on here, maybe. Let's move this back out of my way a little bit. And why is that grayed out? That's really weird. Oh, how did it turn into a smart object? Okay, let's go back for a second here. Let me do a Control Z. Okay, now let's try that. And click our mask. Nope. All right. So there's another way to do that. So since we have black as our foreground, I'm going to click in here and just do an Alt backspace. If you're on a Mac, it's Option Delete, and that will fill that selection with black. And then I'll do a Control D to deselect. So now we've completely masked the color off of our bird. Now we might want to leave a little bit of that color showing just so that the bird isn't quite such a different, shade from the sky. And actually that was in the notes, is this method that I told you that we just did here. Okay, and so to lower basically the opacity of the mask, which is considered density, if you double click in the mask, you'll get the density properties, and then I'm going to pull this down just a little bit. Not a lot, just to bring a hint of color to make it blend a little better. Okay, we have some questions. Oh, Carol said, unlock the background layer. That could be. Why don't you put the gradient below the bird later? You could do that, but you would still have to delete the sky then. And I think it's, in this case, because of these really kind of transparent type feathers here, I think this might be the easier way for this one. I have tried making a selection of this bird, and it was not easy to do something else with it. But thank you. That is a good suggestion as well. Yes, a couple people didn't. Please, 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 please. Before you type a comment, change the to everyone so that everybody can see the comments, and not to hosts and panelists, because otherwise other people can't see the comments and they don't know what I'm talking about when I'm answering you if I don't notice it. Okay, so thank you, and I appreciate that. So there we have our new sky, and it's mostly masked off of our bird. We just let a hint of that color back in, just, like 10, what are we at, like 17%, just a little bit so that it tones it to match the image, and it doesn't look like it's so separate. Okay. I did have somebody who purchased the notes the other day, was already trying these projects, and she said that when she clicked on the mask, double clicking gave her a different panel. She had to just single click it to get that. But for me, it's double clicking. So if you're not getting this panel, maybe try a single click. I think it's just different. I upgraded Photoshop today, so I'm definitely on the latest one. And it could be, maybe a Mac versus PC difference. I'm not sure. So may have to play with that. We're not seeing color lines in the sky. Not on my end, so that could be a zoom thing. It's a pretty smooth gradient over here. Danelle says the gradient shows an angle, but the sky is affected differently. That's just the way it shows up in this box. It just shows them at an angle, but it's not, because I didn't change the angle of the gradient. It was a blue to, that was the color of the gradient. If you look at our original It's a blue to yellow. There was no, I didn't put it at an angle. So that's just the way it illustrates in here. But good question. Thank you. All right. Well, I'll be showing you how to create our own gradients. I'm not sure if I did that, put one in here today. I usually do. Yes, actually I do. I am. It's a project coming up. Okay. All right, so let's close this one. Can you use a brush to remove color from the bird? Yes, if you didn't want to use the select subject, you could use a brush, but I just thought the selecting a subject is quicker, so that's why I did it that way. Okay, so we're different type of sky here. Diane says she's getting the select a mask panel when she double clicks. Yeah, somebody else did that. Oh, maybe it must be a Windows 11 because I'm still on Windows 10. So try single clicking and then you should get that. That's what happened with the other gal. Okay, so we're going to do one more here like this. So there, and choose a gradient. And this time we're going to use in our set here, we'll use the second one of the blues. This one's from my Sky Gradients 1 set. So we're going to say okay, but this one I want to flip because I want the darker blue at the top. So I'm going to just click reverse. And okay, and you can see that this is straight across, but it does just show it as a diagonal in the box. And so this one I'm going to change my blending mode to soft light and the opacity to about 50%. And you can see here's our before and after. It's just popping some more blue into those clouds. Now it might be putting a little bit of that light blue on the bottom here. You can see the grass gets a little bit brighter and the barn has a slight tint to it, but I don't really like the blue on it. So this is where we can mask it with a brush. So we're going to click on the mask, grab a brush. I want to be on a soft round brush, which I already am. And I'm going to zoom in a little. And you can just mask it off. And my brush isn't at 100%, which it needs to be in the flow. So I'm taking all of that texture off. So you can do it like this, and you could mask the whole thing. You can also utilize another gradient to create this mask. So to show you that, and this is where we use the gradient tool on the left. This is one of the few times I use this one. So I'm going to click on that, go up to the top, and this time I want a black to white or a white to black gradient. So I'm going to look under basics, which actually I put it in that group as well. So you can see that you get the same gradient panel no matter which tool you use. And I'm going to use this black to transparent will also work. Click off there. And then we're going to add this in the mask. So we're already in here. So we are going to click and drag. And you can see how it's darkening the sky and not the bottom. So I actually want the black at the bottom. So what I'm going to, oh, it actually worked because I did have it reversed. So I want the black at the bottom because I want to mask the bottom. So this line let me also angle it because this horizon's not quite straight. So I angled this a little bit. I can also bring the this point up, and it will adjust how far up that black is going. So you can, put this exactly where you need it to be. And I think for this one, probably pretty close to the bottom will work. And you can see it's covering all of that. It's also covering that. So I'm going to leave it way at the bottom. I may even go beyond it. There we go. So that is another way to do a gradient mask, is to use the black and white or black to transparent gradient. All right. And there you have it. So here's on and off. Okay. Yes, I did talk about that in the beginning. The difference is if you're using this gradient on a layer, you can't come back in and change the color. Where here, I could reopen this and change it again if I don't like it. So that's the difference between those two. Yep. And one more above that. Selecting a subject to use in a layer mask. I think I'll be doing that in another project, so you'll see that again. Okay. So, all right. So let's close that one. All right. So now let's do something different. So we're going to open this old. It's an old building. This is the back end of one that we shoot a lot on my Barnes and Backroads workshops. I know a few of my former attendees are online today. So with this one, I want to create like a sepia look. So I'm going to use one of the gradient maps, but because I'm looking for a monotone kind of color, I'm going to get a better result if I turn this into a black and white first. And the reason, like I said, you could use a gradient map to do that, but I like the black and white adjustment layer because it lets me control the brightness and darkness of each of my tones in my image. So for this one, I moved the red up a little. I'm actually going to type these in, it'll be faster. 58, whoops, I went too far. 58, 44, 60, minus 102, and I left that one at 80. So I could tone this image and get it the way I want it better with a regular black and white adjustment. So now we're going to do a gradient map adjustment layer. So we're not going to come down here. The gradient map you can find right here in your adjustments panel. It's this last one. You can get to it down here too, gradient map, but it is right here on the panel. So I'm just going to use that one. Again, it's just going to default to that, and we're going to open our panel. So this one we're going to create our own color. So we're going to, I'm going to use this yellow as a starting point, and then I'm just so I have like color stops, and then I'm going to change the numbers. And again, it's like anything in Photoshop, it's trial and error and seeing what works for you. So on the left side, this color, as you can see here, even with the yellows, it's mapped the darker yellows to the darker areas of the image and the lighter yellows to the lighter areas of the image. So we're going to, and this is important, when you're selecting your color stop, you want to click right in that box. Don't click off of it because that's going to create a new color stop. So click in that box and then click color. And this is where you would choose your new color. And of course you would just normally, you'll see what happens as you move around, and you can see how the dark is again affecting the darker areas. But I chose a color, so I'm going to type it in. F17. And then on this right side, whoops, got to say okay first. Do the same thing over on the right. Click this color, and it's EBD7B0. Now that still looks a little weird because there's a middle stop here, and we don't really need that one. I just want the left and the right. So I'm going to click this one, and right next to where it says location, there's a trash can. Just going to click that. So now we have, these are the two colors we just set, our dark sepia and our lighter color. So we did that. Hold on one second here. Let me finish this first. So now I can say OK. And we can either keep the blending mode as is, which is kind of more of a true sepia. I found in testing what was in here, if I went to overlay, it gave it more of a, I don't know, more dramatic kind of an effect. But for this example, I'm going to go back to normal. And then what I did was, I thought it was a little kind of dull. So I added a brightness and contrast adjustment layer, and I made it a little bit brighter and added more contrast. And that gave me, you can see the before and the after. It brightened it up and gave it a little more drama. All right, so let's see. Sky gradients are media loop free, or I think they were. They were ones I got a long time ago. I'm pretty sure they were a free set. Jim says, I'm learning new techniques. Yeah, definitely about trial and error. Yes, and as Dave says, I do one-on-one training, if anybody is interested in that. Do you keep black and white adjustment recipes or presets you particularly like for changing images to black and white? I usually don't, because every image is different and the colors in the image are going to be different. So that's why I just, play with the sliders till I get what I like, what looks good for that particular image. A good question. Yes, the undo button. Yes, Control Z. That's my shortcut for the undo. Jim is doing some AI generated elements that I've been dabbling a bit myself. That's a whole nother ball of wax. Is there an advantage of turning this image to sepia using this method instead of using Nick? I wouldn't say it's an advantage or not. You do have a little bit more control probably. But like if you don't have the Nick suite, this is a great alternative that you can do these kinds of things without the plugins. And you all know I love my plugin programs, but not everybody has those, or maybe you can't afford them and you just are working with what you have in Photoshop. This is definitely another alternative. How is this different than the one below? Below in the layers panel? I mean, we started here, we went to black and white, and we added our gradient, and then our brightness and contrast. No, the other gradient later. Oh, okay. So like I said in the intro, a gradient map is mapping the dark color to the darker tones of the image and the lighter tones of the, so like these dark colors are going only on the darker areas of the image where it's mapping the lighter to the lighter. If we did it as a color wash, it would just be one color all the way over. Let me show you that. Let's do that real quick. I'm going to hide those two, go to my black and white. We'll just add a gradient fill and select this, select that. I'm going to set my colors first. It's a good question. You'll definitely see a dramatic difference. All right, so here, oh, it's already up here. 231 F17. And on this side, EBD 7B0. Say okay, I'm going to select that one and delete it. Okay, and then I'm going to say okay, and I'm going to reverse this. But now when I blend that, hey, where'd it go? Where'd my gradient go? Ooh. Darn. Here, we'll use that one. I think I saved it over there. Say okay. Say reverse. And say okay. There. I must have hit the wrong button. Sorry. So now when we change our blending mode, you can see it's a different, it's just overlaying that one color across the top and the lighter color across the bottom. It's not, so you're getting a different color toning through like this whole area of where the vines are hanging. They're darker up here and lighter down here, which is not really what we would want. We want all of those to be a consistent color, which is what we get with that. Okay, where these are, the darker things are darker, the lighter things are lighter. Okay, so yes, the one, this is a gradient map. where the other one is just a gradient. And that is the difference between the two. So again, the gradient map is going to map those colors, dark to darks and lights to lights. Good questions. Okay, let's move on. It's already 4:30. That's good. I've got time. I got a couple more. So let's open this one. This one we're going to do a couple different versions so you can kind of see how things happen. So this one I'm going to add a black and white adjustment layer. And this one I did 68, 6. I didn't change the greens. Cyan minus 68, 41, 172. And so this is why I like using the black and white adjustment layer instead of just the gradient map, because I can control, like in this case, I really wanted to open up the brightness on those flowers. So this let me do that on here. Okay, let me flip my page. So now we're going to do our gradient map, which I'm going to use the one up here. We're going to click in here, go to our group for today, and we're going to use this kind of bluish, purplish kind of one. I call it Blueberry Pie. This is from, I call it the Delicious Gradient Set. So that's the color we're going to use. So this one has 5 color stops, the way I created it. And we're going to adjust these a little bit. So you can move the color stops in a gradient. So what I wanted to do here, this one, I changed the location. You can just drag it a little bit. So I moved that one a little bit left. This one a little bit left. And this one also to the left. So what I'm doing is brightening it a little bit. Okay. So we've got more of the brighter area and a little less of the darker. So that's what the color stops do. So if I move this one way over, then things are going to get really icky. But if I move it, if I move it too far this way, it might be too bright. So you need to find that, point that you like where the colors are blending. But again, it's, darks, lights, and then the various midtones are getting mapped to these different areas. And then I'll say okay, and okay. And I also added a brightness. I find a lot of times with the gradient maps, you sometimes need to do the brightness and contrast just to tweak it and get your image the way you want it to be. And just a little bit of contrast. And there you have it. So that's version 1. Okay, so that's one way I could go with this image. It kind of give it, instead of a sepia, it's like the bluish monotone. Okay. So I'm going to I'm just going to delete that one and the gradient map. And we're going to do a different one. So we're going to go into another gradient map layer. Click here. Click here. And this time I'm going to use that blue and yellow one again. But it's going very different than it did on a sky, because before we used it as a gradient, now we're using it as a gradient map. Yes, this is how you can do split toning as well, which is kind of what we're going to be doing on these couple projects. So obviously that needs to be reversed, right? Because we wouldn't want that to look like that. We're going to say okay and click on the reverse. And then we're going to close that. Brightness and contrast. And I brought the brightness way down on this one. About there. And then really upped the contrast. Okay, and that is another version. So here's where we created basically a duotone, because it was the blues and the yellows in that gradient. So now you've created the duotone. Okay, do you ever change the gradient method I default perceptual? Not usually. I find this is generally works for the kind of work I'm doing. I was actually trying that when I was doing some of these, but I didn't really find a whole lot of difference. So I'm not really sure when, that one looks kind of weird. Oh yeah, you can see it's like stripes here. But yeah, perceptual seems to work just fine, and that's the default. So this is how you could create a duotone. So let's do one more here. So I'm going to turn off. Actually, what's up? What are the tiny triangles on the gradient? Oh, okay. So let me go in here and go in here. Like I said, this one's just got a bunch of stops. Some of them, oh gosh, I forgot. I haven't done it in a while. Oh, so if you add a stop, you also get that little triangle, and that lets you control the feathering between the two stops. So that's what that's doing. So you can see if I drag it further that way, it's a hard edge. And if I go right to that next stop, and if I bring it back, then it's a softer edge. So, thanks. Good question. Ooh, that looks really weird. Let's cancel that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I just want to turn off the black and white adjustment layer for a minute. And I'm going to use the quick selection tool again because I want to mask the flowers. So I'm going to go back to my background layer, go to quick selection tool, and wrong one, quick selection tool, and select subject. So here you go, Virginia. Here's how you do this. So all I did was select subject. It selected my subject here. So I'm going to click on the mask on my gradient map layer because I want to hide that color there. And this time I should be able to do the Alt backspace because I'm not on a layer. It's just the gradient, not the actual image. Control D. Now, obviously, I don't want it to be that bright. So what I did was then I copied this mask to the brightness layer. So I know I've done this in other webinars, but in case you've forgotten how, if you select your mask and hold down the Alt or Option on a Mac key, click and drag, you can copy a mask. And this is where it will say, because there's a mask already there, it's asking me to replace it, and I want to say yes, because I want to replace it with this one, because it was just a blank mask. Okay, so that same adjustment now applies to the two. And I'm going to turn the black and white layer back on, and then I'm going to copy this mask again. So Alt, drag, yes. And then, like we did before, I'm going to lower the density of this mask to let some of the black and white come through so I can kind of make them like faded flowers. So they have a hint of color, but I don't want them to be like the full original color. So we've masked part of the black and white, and then the gradient map, we've completely taken, the gradient map off of the flowers, and as well as the brightness adjustment. So we're dealing with these and then adding some of the black and white back into that. So that's another way you can play around and do some cool stuff with your various images. And this one, what else did I do? Oh, and then I did one more thing. Of course, don't I always just do one more? So I'm going to change the gradient map to this kind of teal one in here. And this one is called Cobalt Iron. I don't remember. I did get this one, I think, from somewhere, but I don't remember from where. So I want to say, okay, then I want to uncheck reverse because I don't want that one reversed. I'm going to say, okay, turn off this black and white mask. So to turn off a mask without deleting it, you can right-click it and disable the mask. So basically the mask is not there. And And then on the gradient map, I lowered the density of this one to about there. And I kind of like that shades of kind of like the teal to the almost white here. And I thought that was a pretty cool one. I think out of them all, that was my favorite out of this group. So Mary Jo says, if you feather the mask, will it blend better with the background? Yes, you can do that, but because I really wanted to select that subject, I didn't really want it to feather out in this case. That's why I just did the select subject. But yes, you could, if it was a subject you needed it to blend with, you could either feather the selection or use a brush and do it that way. But yes, you can do that. Good question. Okay, so I said we were also going to, we've been dealing with layers, okay? So I want to deal with, and we've been dealing with masks. So what's a clipping mask? And I know probably most of you have been on one of my various texture webinars, but I'm going to show you what a clipping mask does. So it works very different than a mask. It serves a different purpose. Even though it's got the name masking in there, it's just different. You'll see. So what I want to do with this one is I want to create basically a border around here, and I'm going to clip my image to this mask that's already created to have the subject take on this shape. So I'm going to first duplicate my background with a Control-J. And I'm going to turn this background off so that you can see this process happen better. So I want to bring in my clipping mask. So again, I'm dragging from my other screen. I do work with 2 monitors. If you don't have 2 monitors, instead of dragging, you could go to File, Place Embedded, and this is what you can also do with textures or any second thing that you want to bring in. And I'm going to use this 6B. So it's going to bring that in on a separate layer. And now I want to stretch this out to the edges. And then I'm going to bring this shape below my subject. So it's in between. Then we want to highlight this top layer. And we're going to hold down the Alt Option key and then put your cursor in between. When you get that little square with the down arrow, click. So now you see that this icon moved over and there's a little tiny down pointing arrow. That's telling me that this image is clipped to this layer, okay? And it's now taken on that shape. And I turned this one off because otherwise it would look like nothing happened, because that would still be showing around the edges. So what we can do with an image like this now is if we can create a border by adding some color behind this mask. So I'm going to click here and add a blank layer because I want it under my mask. And let's see, where's my color? Okay, and then I'm going to open my foreground color picker. And of course, I've already pre-selected my color, 788 2B9, which I did pick out of this image, and then I think I tweaked it just a little bit. We'll say OK. And then to fill a layer with color, it's Alt Backspace, just like we did on the mask, or Option Delete on a Mac. So now to make that shape stand out a little bit, I'm going to add a drop shadow to it. And we do that by, first we need to highlight that layer because that's the layer we want to do the drop shadow on. Double click in like the blank area, or you can hit the FX at the bottom, but I find it easier to just double click. Open our Layer Styles panel. Click on Drop Shadow, and make sure if you just check the checkbox, you got to make sure you click this row so that it's highlighted so you get the right controls in here. And I'm going to use Multiply Black. I think it's remembering what I did the other day when I was doing this project. I like my lighting at 135. It gives me that upper left to lower right shading. And then, yep, 12, 14, 32. Those are the numbers I want. And again, that's going to be different depending on the size of your image, the size of, the shape, how much shadow you want there. You can just move the sliders and you'll see how that, changes. And then say, okay. So when I had this one done, I decided, I'm not sure if I really like that shape. I think it's too busy for this image. So we could easily change this shape. So what I'm going to do first is unclip this mask. So if we, again, hold the Alt key, go between, now it says it's going to disconnect them. Okay, so now it's not clipped to that anymore. I'm going to just turn that one off. And I'm going to bring in a different shape. And I'm just going to drag it because it's quicker for me. And let's turn that off so we can see the size of our shape. And we want to just stretch it out to edges of our image. And you can always bring it in more, out more. You can go beyond the edges if you wanted, depending on what you're looking to do. Turn that back on and do our Alt click. So now we have a different shape, and I can copy these layer effects by right-clicking, copy layer style, right-clicking, and paste layer style. So you don't have to recreate it all. Yes, I will do that, Virginia, in a second. So there you have it. So it's just another cool way that you can, play with an image. And then the other thing you can do to dress up the color in the background is we can add a pattern to it. So we want to add it to this color. So we're going to click the color so it'll add above that. And the way you get to that is go to Window, Patterns. And we want to use these are in Photoshop, the legacy patterns and more. And then there's a couple things. I'm going to go legacy patterns, and I like these artist surfaces. And we're going to use the one called, if you hover over it, the name will pop up. Oh, that's parchment. I want pastel light. No, I can't find it. Yeah, that's it, oil pastel light. I want to use that one. So when you first apply it, we can close that. It's going to look like a black and white, which it is, and that's okay because we're going to, again, blending modes are our friend, and that's what's going to let us blend this pattern to that. So if I double click in this thumbnail, it will let me change the scale of the pattern to kind of fit my image. And what that is if you hit this little arrow, you get a slider, and it will make the pattern bigger or smaller. You don't want to go too big, but I came up to about 133. And I thought that fit this image a little bit better. And then I changed my blending mode to multiply. So it dressed up that edge there instead of just being a solid color. And because I used multiply, it darkened that pattern. If you were to use like soft light, it would be much softer. You could use overlay, hard light. Lighten would probably be too bright. But I liked multiply for this particular one. And you could always lower the opacity of that pattern too if you wanted to a little bit, if it's too heavy. So Virginia says, can I ask how to make these shapes real quick? Sure. They're actually really easy. I do have a bunch in my store as well that are already pre-made for you, and you'll get these two in with the notes and everything else. I also want to show you how to load gradients, so I'll do that in a second. So you just make a new file. I usually make mine 15 by 15 inches so that they're big enough for my things, and I actually didn't want. You want to do it on a transparent layer, which is fine. I'm going to add a transparent layer here. I could have chosen transparent, but I usually like to work with a with a white layer below it because just looking at that while I'm creating it kind of bothers my eyes. So we'll delete the white later. So you're going to be working on a transparent layer. You want to grab a brush. There's all kinds of brushes in Photoshop, and you can get more brushes, if you're on the Creative Cloud, if you go to the gear wheel and go to Get More Brushes, that will take you right to the Adobe site. And there's tons of different brushes in here that you could use to create textures, and these as well. But for this one, I'm going to just grab something in here. I use this one for textures a lot, so we'll try it for this shape, this Kyle Bonus Chunky Charcoal. We're going to make it real big. You want your foreground color to be black and your opacity and your flow at 100%. And then you're just going to click around. First, I kind of work on creating an edge. And we're going to go like this and kind of go around it. And I'm not being real perfect, but, and then you'll come back in and you can start darkening the center. So I'll show you if you didn't see one of these completed. So this is one of the ones I did. It's just a black shape on a transparent background. And that becomes a layer mask. Or a clipping mask, sorry, not a layer mask. I also call them crop shapes because you're cropping your image to that, so it's kind of, they're interchangeable wording. So if you look at my store for them, they're called crop shapes, but they're clipping masks. And then you can just, you know, create something like that. And, you know, keep playing with it from there. So to bring the gradients in, most of you know how to bring in brushes. Let's close that. I guess I need to have something open. Let's just open an image. So when you are on, it doesn't matter which gradient tool, if you just are on one of the gradient tools and you go to your, actually let's, yeah, just click in the gradient and then go to that gear wheel and you're going to import gradients. Just like you would a set of brushes or patterns or anything else. They're all kind of the same way. And then you'll just import this set. And it's a .grd file for gradient when you bring them in. And again, you can save your own, create your own when you're in there. And let me go to the other way. It's easier to see over here. Once you've created something new, if you just pick some colors and then, oops, say OK. On this side, pick something lighter. Say OK. If you wanted to save this where it says custom, you can type in a name. And you just want to be sure if you like started with one that was in the basics or somewhere else, if you click new now, it's going to add it to that same folder. So just make sure, like I'm going to add it to this folder. If you don't want it in a folder, then just kind of, you want to not be in a folder. But click it, rename it, and say new, and there it goes. So if you're not in a folder, then it will add to the bottom of this list. Or I would probably create a folder and just say, like, my gradients or something, and that way you can always put them in the same folder. Because then you can close folders when you don't want to see them. And then just open them when you need them. And if you want to delete one, just right-click it and delete it. You can also rename them there, too. So, okay. All right. Oh, yeah, 1 second. What?
Sure you mentioned about Don's article.
Oh, yes. Dave just reminded me. One of my longtime followers, Don Poulton, is online, I know, today. He's in Canada. And if you are a member of PSA, he has an article in the PSA Journal. I just read it this morning. Congratulations, Don. It was really, really good. It was on shooting the grain elevators all over, some in the US and some in Canada. So that was very, very cool. So be sure to catch that. Yes, the recording will be up tomorrow. I'm not sure if it will be as early as usual because I have an appointment in the morning. I'm going to try and get it up early, but the link will be in tomorrow's blog. And and I'll send out a newsletter as well. And Dave drew randomly 2 names for free entries to the June conference. If you are online, Susan Bailey and Carolyn Haybelt. You guys have free entries, and if I don't think you signed up yet, but if you have that, I'll credit that one to the next conference, and then you'll have a free entry for June. We covered a lot in an hour, so thank you. Just checking to see if I missed any other questions. Colleen said back when we were stamping the shape, she said, do you want to make the brush move in different directions? Generally, yeah, because you don't want to get a direct pattern most of the time. So when you're doing that with your brush, when you have it set, this one is set to default and randomly, rotate. You can see it's moving around. If you have a brush that's not set that way, you want to go into the brush settings, and under the shape dynamics, you can control the angle jitter, and this one is set to 100, but pretty much anything other than 0 will work, and that will make the brush rotate as you're stamping. So thanks, Colleen. Good question. So that way you don't get unless you really want an exact repeat pattern, but this way this gives you something, it will vary those edges for you. Alrighty, I think we've covered it all. If I find any other questions that I missed, I will address those in the blog, but I think we got everything. Lori, if you go to Sunday's blog, there is a direct link to the notes or the newsletter that went out yesterday, or if you go to the website and go to the Peacock Studio and then go to webinar notes, it will probably pop up as the first one. This is webinar number 37 that I've done since 2020. So thank you much. I hope you all enjoyed it, and we will talk to you all soon. Take care.